be saying something, you would be saying something when you're a known confidant of Trump, and it would be something that we were just making up. But Roger, recap all the history and then what you're expecting and what you've heard. This is obviously classified, so you give your stalts of it about what is about to come out and why they're so scared.
Well, Alex, I think you've got it exactly right. Back in the late 90s, a law was passed that mandated the release of all the declassification of all the materials pertaining to JFK's assassination. The date they set fell early in Donald Trump's first term in 2017. And I brought it to his attention in a phone conversation. I said, this is coming up. What are you going to do? He wasn't aware of the deadline, but he said he'd check into it. Then he got back to me and he said, you're right. This is all set to happen. What do you think I should do? And my recommendation was to release it all. It's been more than 50 years. There's nobody involved who is still alive, by and large. And if elements of the government were involved in the murder of an American president, well, the American people should know that. So he told me he was going to think about it, and I got the strong impression he was going to release everything. And then he released about 80% of it. Now, we found out some very significant things in what he did release. For example, the KGB had run their own investigation. They had determined that there was a conspiracy, a plot, and that Lyndon Johnson was the centerpiece of it. The French intelligence had also run their own investigation, come up with the same conclusion. But then, ultimately, he released about 80% of it, held back about 20. And when I asked him why he did that, he told me that Mike Pompeo, then the head of the CIA, had convinced him that it was too explosive and it would expose the agency's methods and sources. So then I said, well, but you've seen it all. What is it? And he said, it's so terrible I can't tell you. I just can't tell you, but someday you'll know. And by the way, I told my good friend, Judge Andrew Napolitano, the exact same thing. And he basically said the same thing with my good friend, Sean Hannity, the other night. So now I think you nailed Johnson's involvement. I had laid this out in my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, with heavy documentation. But the audio tape that you got from Billy Saul Estes' grandson, Saul Estes being a crony of Johnson, who Johnson made millions off of and then abused, sent to prison. You nailed Johnson's involvement. I believe these upcoming revelations, which remember, there's 5 million pages if you include everything involving JFK, RFK, and MLK. I believe we're going to see it all without redactions very shortly. I have suggested to the president that he include all of the classified documents regarding the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, because we still haven't been told the full truth about that yet. And to boot, frankly, I think he ultimately needs to declassify everything regarding Butler, Pennsylvania, as well as what happened in West Palm Beach. So I think we're... And
he said he's going to have an investigation of that as well.
I think he's entertaining it. I don't speak for the president. I can't speak for the president, but I think he is considering it, yes.
I've seen reports even right before he got elected. He said, we'll investigate Butler, and some of his people he's now brought in. But sure, keep going.
So, I mean, I think we're on the cusp of learning it all. Again, this is like a puzzle. So there's the Lyndon Johnson piece. I think as E. Howard Hunt, the famous CIA operative who was on the ground in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, also pops up again as one of the Watergate burglars. How coincidental. 3 of the other Watergate burglars also on the payroll of the CIA at the time of the Watergate break-in, presumably on the payroll of the agency when they were in Dealey Plaza. Again, as E. Howard Hunt says on his deathbed to his son, St. John Hunt, who co-authored my book, The Bush Crime Family. And by the way, this is on audio tape, so it's not just the verbal remembrance of St. John Hunt. He's got it on tape. E. Howard Hunt says, yes, I was on the ground in Dallas, but I was a backbencher. LBJ was running the show. So you have now proven that. That piece of audio tape that InfoWars broadcast, I think, nails any question about Johnson.
And it fits exactly with your New York Times bestselling book that breaks it down.
Yeah, because in the audio tape, as you know, Cliff Carter, the executive director of the Democrat National Committee under LBJ, a political operative whose life is dedicated to LBJ, says to Billy Saul, Lyndon hired Mac Wallace to kill JFK. Well, I found Mac Wallace's fingerprints through my research. His fingerprints are found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository Building, on the cardboard boxes that form the so-called crow's nest from which the shooter shot, and on the window casing.
And tell folks what Nixon told you, and now has even come out in tapes that you pointed out. He also told you personally after he was the president, when you guys got even closer, very close confidants on record until his death, what Nixon told you.
Yeah, I was at his home in Saddle River. Now, as I've said, Nixon was not a man who was retrospective. He was very introspective and very forward-looking. It was very hard to get him to talk about Eisenhower and McCarthy and being stoned by communist mobs in Caracas, or the debates with Kennedy. He had a good relationship with Jack Kennedy. They both came to the House at the same time. They're both ardent anti-communists. They were friendly rivals. I asked him after a couple cocktails, because as you know, Alex, he made a mean martini. He used to call it a silver bullet. I asked him, Mr. President, who really killed John Kennedy? And he looked at his martini for a long time, and he looked up and he said, "Let me say this: the Warren Commission was the biggest goddamn hoax in American history." I said, "Sir, I don't understand." He said, "Let me put it another way. Lyndon and I both wanted to be president, but I wasn't willing to kill for it." And that's actually what motivated me to write the book. I put 5 years into that book. But I think you have now, through InfoWars, you've absolutely nailed Johnson's involvement. These new upcoming disclosures of the declassified documents will nail the CIA's involvement. And frankly, there's plenty in Sam Giancana's daughter's book, other experts on organized crime who can tie the mob into the plot. Johnson, almost immediately after he becomes president, pardons a man named Jack Halfer, who is a bagman for the mob. He's the guy who's been paying Johnson to protect the illegal gambling dens in San Antonio.
And for folks that don't know, the OSS and the CIA worked hand in glove with the Italian mafia. So this wasn't like people go, how's the mob with the CIA? It's the same thing.
Well, now here's the point, and that is when Castro came to power in Cuba, he expelled all the CIA assets. But he made a deal with the mob to keep the casinos running, because Castro was now taking what had been Batista's piece. So the mob still had assets on the ground in Cuba, and the U.S. government wanted to know what was going on in Cuba. So it is actually Vice President Richard Nixon and an operative who works for Howard Hughes who bring the mob and the CIA together. And the mob is doing their patriotic duty. They're helping the government figure out what's going on in the ground.
And again, it goes back to World War II, though, with the only intel they had under German-occupied, Italy. Once Mussolini got it, or even before that, the Germans were in charge. They were there. That's on record as well.
Well, also, the mob is letting the FBI know what Nazis are doing on the docks in New York City. We're looking for Nazi infiltration of the United States.
When they tried to blow up that dock with explosives.
Exactly right.
It was the mob caught those Nazis that got executed. So Roger, bottom line, I know you can't go too far, but you're saying CIA involved Kennedy, that's in the new documents.
Yes, I think that. Look, just the fact that Mike Pompeo jumps in at the last minute and persuades the president, which he now, as you pointed out, Alex, he said on the record publicly, he now regrets, tells you who has something to hide in these upcoming documents. Again, the CIA role is adequately covered in my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. By the way, you can get it by going to themanwhokilledkennedy.com, themanwhokilledkennedy.com. But always, no matter where you choose to buy it, get the paperback version because it has 3 extra chapters.
And let me add this. I read your book, it's been out 20 years, about 15 years ago, met you at a big Kennedy symposium in Dallas, probably 14, 15 years ago when you were the keynote speaker. And of course, I think what made the TV shows, everything, it is still the definitive book. And it's not just evergreen, it's ultra green. It's stronger today because it's been totally validated.
Well, thanks to the audio that you discovered, I think we have absolutely nailed this. There's no question about it. Fingerprint evidence, eyewitness evidence. 6 different witnesses tell either the Dallas police or the FBI that they see a man who meets the physical description of Malcolm Mac Wallace in the window of the 6th floor.
And we get E. Howard Hunt arrested as one of the tramps, released. It's on record. So last point on this. I interviewed Madeline Duncan Brown twice on my Access TV show and once on my syndicated radio show in person. She still lived here in Austin. She was the admitted main mistress of LBJ, had a son with him. And she was there.
Like him, was a dead ringer for LBJ.
Yeah, but she was on record. This is not even debated. And she said, she was there a few days before in Dallas, and he came in to have sex with her in the hotel room. And she told me this right there, in the studio. And he said, that son of a bitch, Kennedy, will never embarrass me again when he gets here in a few days. And then she heard him talking to other men saying, I want that son of a bitch dead.
There is all of that is accurate. It's interesting that I was in a green room with Geraldo Rivera at Fox. This was after I wrote my book. And I told him that I had seen his iconic interview with Madeline Brown, in which she tells him that the night before the assassination, she had an assassination with LBJ in the Fort Worth Hotel. And he squeezed her hand and he said, after tomorrow, I won't have to put up with those Irish sons of bitches ever again.
Yeah, that's the exact quote. And she told me that. We got to find the video. I've got.
And when I asked Geraldo about that, he said, who's Madeline Brown? I said, pardon me? He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he went and locked himself in.
Well, you know who brought me her and everybody. God, we broke with George Norrie the exclusive, not just audio, video of E. Howard Hunt's deathbed confession. He did 2. He thought he'd die once, then did the last one right before he died. And And this was a known CIA guy who wasn't involved in it, but was a Texan. And he died a few years ago, like 100. But he was the one that got me her. Yeah, I did this interview right here. So, God almighty. So it is out there. Wow. We got to find, I did one too at the KJFK studios with her and one on Access TV. So we got to find that stuff because this is incredible, Rod. This is history.
Well, and then the other piece of tape I think you should find pretty easy. You can find it on YouTube. Jack Ruby, who the Warren Commission tells us has no known connection to organized crime, which is a joke because he's a button man for the mob in Chicago. He runs Carlos Marcello, the mobster who runs Texas and Louisiana, runs his casinos in Cuba, even post-Castro. He is being led down a hallway by a couple of Texas Rangers. He's handcuffed, and reporters are shouting to him, Jack, how could this happen? Remember, he knew all the cops. He knew all the reporters in Dallas. They say, Jack, how could this happen? And Ruby says, look at the man at the top, the man at the very top. And they say, Jack, what do you mean? And he says, if Adlai Stevenson had been vice president, this never would have happened. There it is.
And Ruby was pissed by then. Why did he follow the order to do it? But then why did he later turn against him?
I think he had no choice. I think it was kill or be killed. It's interesting, as you know, he was perfectly healthy when he went into prison. And then after he was attended by government doctors and given some injections, he suddenly had terminal cancer. So
he got one of those overnight cancers.
Yes, exactly.
All right, you got to go. I wish we had more time. You got to start. You were like, where are you, Al? A few weeks ago, I'm like, come on, I'm too busy. Now you're like, Alex, you're not having me on. Every day, buddy, we want you on. What do you make of this helicopter thing? I had a bunch of FAA experts on. They say none of it makes sense. If you look at how all this works, stuff was turned off. This is the most busy airspace in North America.